Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is Jim Boomer. Hi, Jim. Thank you for being on this episode of the podcast.
Hi, John. Glad to be here and on the 50th episode. That's pretty exciting.
It is the 50th episode. You know, when we set out to do this podcast, gosh, at the beginning of this year, we didn't know how many episodes we were going to do, right? We were just committed to doing it, having these conversations and hearing the response. And it's been overwhelmingly positive from our listeners that they want to hear more of these conversations. So thanks to our listeners out there, we get to record the 50th episode today, right now. And we are planning for 50 more. So just really excited about that milestone. And it's all thanks to our listeners. So Jim, for our topic of discussion today, right? You work with firms in a lot of different areas, one of which is leadership. And the topic of succession planning has always been around. It's always been really important, but it has evolved over time as well. And so the aspect of succession planning we really want to highlight in this conversation is that succession planning is not just for the partner group. So before we kind of dive into some real specific questions around that, I think it makes sense to start with defining succession planning, because depending on who you talk to, that can mean different things. So Jim, from your perspective, what is succession planning?
Well, I think you're spot on in that when you say it shouldn't just focus on only the partners, because I think many people immediately think of the top of the organization when they hear succession planning. So, you know, who will be our next managing partner, or who's in the pipeline to become the next partner? Like, how do we fill that leadership pipeline? I mean, that's critically important to the success of your firm or any organization. But it shouldn't stop there. Like your team needs to really be focused on succession planning at all levels and functions within your firm. So really at its most basic level, I define succession planning as creating sort of human redundancy at all levels in your organization in order to one, reduce risk, and second, to prepare your firm for sustainability and for sustained growth.
Yes, and according to that definition, it makes perfect sense why that would not just be isolated to the partner group. So I think that's a really great definition. You know, as you think about accounting firms, just all the changes they're going through and just how the industry is evolving, maybe what clients are really wanting from their firms. Speak to us about why this topic of succession planning is really important today.
Well, there's a lot of reasons why it's important. I'll try to boil it down to what I think are the most important. I think first, and I already mentioned the word risk, but from a risk perspective, you know, life happens. From the more common, like people leaving for another opportunity, another job, and really in the market we're in right now, you know, everybody talking about the great resignation. There's a lot of that happening, but you also have the less likely, but not impossible instance where we have, you know, we get hit by a bus, we have a fatal accident or medical emergency, or if it's not fatal, like it leaves us unable to work for a long period of time. That creates an amazing amount of risk. And so if we don't have a plan in place and haven't invested in developing our people for what's next, we're going to find ourselves reacting to sort of that house on fire moment, which really sends people into a panic, and also doesn't really often lead to the best or the most strategic decision making when you're in that reactionary mode. I think second, you know, most and not all professionals are constantly thinking about what's next on their career path. Especially your star team members are thinking in this way. how big of a leap it is can vary, so it might be an incremental promotion. It may be a complete shift in what they're doing, but we need to be prepared that people will want to move on to the next stage in their career. And so without that succession planning, cross training, and professional development throughout the team, the voided position will often leave us back at square one, where we have to hire from outside the organization. And in that interim, it goes completely unfilled. Things fall through the crack. Things are left unattended. So having that, I use the word cross training, but just at the very least, do some cross training to where you have that redundancy. And then finally, I'd say, a comprehensive succession plan will naturally lead us to invest in our people in order to prepare them for that next stage. And if we're investing in our people, we're actually decreasing the likelihood that they will be out looking at or even moving to another organization where they know that they will get it, or they will get a commitment that they will get invested in. Those would be the top reasons that I think this is important. But I'll go back to the word sustainability. Every organization wants to be in business tomorrow, next year. And if you're not planning ahead, you're putting yourself at a huge risk that won't be the case.
Right. All those are really good reasons. One I thought of, and it probably falls as a bullet point underneath maybe just investing in your people and kind of, creating the path. One positive byproduct of a strong sense of succession planning is when your employees come to you and maybe they want some new flexibility in their work. Maybe they want to cut down their hours. Maybe they want to add something to their plate, right? That maybe hasn't historically been on their plate. Things like that. And without having a succession strategy in place, we're not able to be as flexible with our people as maybe we could be, right? And then that ends up kind of resulting in them either leaving or searching elsewhere. So I think there's a big flexibility component that's a good byproduct of a lot of this effort as well.
It's a great point and a great addition, because much like I said, we're going to see more movement from job to job. You're also going to see a higher demand of that flexibility. And I think it's a good thing. As a profession, we've had a lot of up or out mentality. I started in what was the Big Five, and that was certainly the mentality. People either climbed the ladder in the defined structure, or they left after a number of years, and either due to burnout or they wanted to go do something else. So I think that flexibility really gives us an option to maintain high quality team members when life changes for them.
Yep, absolutely. So the topic of succession planning, as we've kind of defined it, we've talked about why it's important and all the positive ripple effects it has in your organization, which is great, but it could be a little overwhelming too. This idea of like, how do you approach this topic? It seems really big, multi-level. Like, how do we approach it? So what kind of tips, solutions, ideas, recommendations do you have for our listeners with how to approach this topic?
Yeah, well, you're right on. It's a huge topic and huge endeavor, and I think that's why a lot of organizations struggle with it. So I'll try to simplify it down into the basics. Now, there's a lot of work that goes into each of these steps, but trying to simplify breaks through the ceiling of complexity. So I would say the first step you have to do is really get a handle on what are the roles in your firm, and actually do an assessment of those. Look at skills, knowledge, experience, and even mindset that's required to succeed in that role. And you've got to document it. And it sounds simple, but the number of firms that we'll go into and work with, that do not have just basic job descriptions of what their people do is astounding. And so, like I said, it takes some time, it takes some work, but it's important to do. That'll give you an idea of take the people out of it, but what's your organization and how is it structured with the different roles? The second step is to get into the people side of it. Now that you understand what you need in your firm, now you need to look at your current team and say, what do we have? And you've got to assess each member on those different areas, skills, knowledge, experience, and mindset, to get an idea of where you as an organization, or as a team, I should say, because we're focused on the people, where you're strong, where maybe you have some opportunity to improve, and frankly, what's missing altogether. Like, you may have huge gaps that you don't have anybody on your team that can do that. And so that's gonna drive your strategy. So those two together will give you the full picture of where you are today, which is where you have to start. And then you can start to develop that comprehensive plan to fill in those gaps and strengthen the areas of weakness. It'll also tell you areas of strength that maybe you don't need to be hiring a lot more people that excel in this area. So if you sometimes having too much redundancy in a particular area can be a negative. So you may have to shift and work closely with recruiting and hiring teams to shift the types of people that you're looking to go hire. It also will drive what are the development plans for your current team. And so I left one aspect of that when I said skills, knowledge, experience, and mindset. There's also a desire piece of it. So, and that kind of plays into mindset, but it's important. Like, asking people what their personal vision is will really give you insight where they want to go and where they may be a prime candidate to upskill into that position. Or it may say, I don't have anybody that has any interest in filling this void. Then you got to look outside. So I mean, if I simplify it, that's kind of how I do it. Assess the organization and the roles, assess the people that you have, and then develop a plan of how you're going to fill those gaps, and strengthen the areas where you're weak, and go from there. There's a lot more steps to it, but.
Right. And I think one topic and I would love to hear your feedback on this, Jim, that I think is related to this as well. And I actually just recorded an episode of this podcast with Sandra on this topic, and that is outsourcing. So as you go through this succession planning process, you may uncover, right? Because you said in one of your examples, no one really wants to do that internally. Well, how do we get that taken care of through maybe an outside resource, and we don't have to create any sort of succession internally for that specific function or role, because we've determined from a strategy perspective, it makes sense to keep that outside. Do you see that happening as well, Jim?
Oh, most definitely. It's probably slower on the uptake with our clients than I've seen internally with our own organization. But in the last couple years, going back to the war for talent, just people not being able to find, they're kind of forced into this. But for years, we've kind of taken that approach with Boomer Consulting, is look at what the need is, or that gap, and say, is it strategic to our organization, and or is it strategic to delivering value to our clients and partners? And if the answer is no, then first step is to look for what's an outside resource. If the answer is yes, then you need a core person you need to get the who on your team to deliver or to drive that. But outsourcing is a great piece of the puzzle. So is technology and automation. And I'm sure you and Sandra talked about that shift from the pyramid to the diamond, and how do you get there, and what has been the doers and the people that do some of the more mundane and moving data around type work will those tasks can be outsourced, they can be automated. Those people then move up to higher level critical thinking, relationship building, all of those things. So that is certainly a piece of this puzzle, and why we need to be thinking and planning around succession, and those elements should weigh into it.
So you just kind of walked us through some tips, some recommendations. Hey, here's how your firm can approach this. We always like to end each conversation with, what's your recommendation for kind of the first next step someone takes, right? They're listening to this podcast, maybe they're energized around this topic and thinking, yeah, we need to start to get our arms around this. What's your answer to that question in terms of, hey, if you really want to start down the path of succession planning, here's the one key thing you need to get in place kind of right out of the gate to really go down the right path here. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think first off, the steps I outlined earlier to assess the roles in your firm and the current team members, do that first if you haven't already. Identify those gaps, redundancies, areas of strength to drive your planning. And second would be start investing in your team at all levels to prepare them for what's next in their career. This not only benefits that individual, but also the firm, as it reduces risk. As I said earlier, it prepares for smoother transitions when people leave or are promoted, and it develops a team that's highly skilled, productive, profitable, and highly valued by your clients. Because if we think about your clients, this topic applies to every organization. And so most of your clients could benefit from your guidance in this area of succession. And I know many firms are already helping them there. But we also see that firms that are doing that are spending most of their time on helping their clients and not taking that step back to look at their own organization. So my next step, number 2, would be start investing in your people. And I would say that investment and it really should take many forms. Everything from on-the-job training. So if you're trying to get people more into client relationships or advisory and consulting, take them with you so they can see it and experience it, and that will help them in terms of their development. And it can range to formal professional education. And this really should include soft skills, communication, leadership, all of these things to get them better prepared for that next step. And then, the final one, and probably a little self-serving, but also, getting involved in peer groups and getting those people around others that are in the same position, same level, can share with each other will accelerate their progress. And I say self-serving because we have the boomer circles, but that advice goes forward, whether it's some other peer group that you get them involved in. I truly believe that is an accelerator for investing in your people and upskilling them.
That's great. And Jim, as always, it's a pleasure speaking with you on the podcast. You gave us a lot to think about around succession planning. For those that are listening to this podcast, if you like these topics, we really do ask that you go ahead and subscribe. That really helps us out, gives our podcast more exposure there on all the places that our podcasts are posted. We release new episodes every Tuesday morning. As we mentioned at the beginning of this episode, this is our 50th episode. We have not missed a Tuesday morning yet, knock on wood. So we do release new episodes every Tuesday morning. So please subscribe and stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, John.